Yes.
Okay. Okay. So one of the things, and we're sorry to shock people with the death of Pete Fisher. He passed away yesterday morning early, and afterwards perhaps Luis has additional news. But anyhow, he did pass away yesterday morning early. We are studying the life of David. And remember, we're studying it so we can understand why he's known to be a man after God's own heart. And there's several things in today's lesson, I think, that will point that out too. But today's lessons are sort of strange. And
so I told Mary, this may be the day that I say some things that make some of you not like us anymore. These are hard chapters. And I can tell you what I believe I've done, but these are hard subjects to deal with. So if you don't raise an eyebrow at some of it, I probably am not doing my job.
So first of all, before we get started, I am going to try to share a screen. Before we left last week at the end of halfway through 1 Samuel chapter 27. So if you have your Bibles, it's probably best to bring those out. And we are going to be using the translation, the Berean Bible. And
Don't click on the settings.
Okay, so right there, share screens. And the first one I want is this one. And then I want to share. Okay, I'm going to share. And Jackie, I see you on the screen. So can you give me a thumbs up if you can see the map? Okay, cool. So just to give everybody an idea, last time we left with David and his 600 men had decided to flee to Gath and visit with King Achish. And they had an exchange, and King Achish has decided that David and his 600 men and their families can go and live in Ziklag. You can see there's 2 Ziklags on this map. It's because nobody knows for sure where Ziklag is, but it's right about that area. The other important thing to look at this map is you're going to hear the cities or the areas of, say these words for me, Scott.
Girzites, Geshurites, and the Jerahmeelites.
No, the Amalekites. Those 3 areas are part of the Philistine area. And then you're also going to hear the Negev of Judah, which would be over here. You're going to hear the Negev of the Kenites and the Negev of the Jerahmeelites.
Jerahmeelites, yeah.
And those are all part of Saul's kingdom or of the Jews, okay? And what's interesting about this week's study, if someone was just reading the Bible and a minister was doing a sermon, if you didn't know this geography, all of this, I think, is lost. So anyhow, keep that in mind. I'm going to stop sharing.
Real quick, hold on, before you stop sharing. What you want to see is over there on the left side of your screen, that's the Mediterranean. And the Philistines are basically coastal tribes. And so the Philistines are up against the Mediterranean. These Girzites, Amalekites, they're all lined up on the coast. And then the Israel is over between there and the Dead Sea. So as we talk about it, that's probably a good picture to keep in mind.
Okay, I'm going to stop sharing so you can see us again, and I didn't blow anything up. Okay, and we are going to start on chapter 27.
We ended in I think verse 6 last time.
Okay, go ahead.
So,
do you want to read that?
Sure, I'll start at 6. David has come to stay with Achish, who's the king of this group of Philistines. And Achish's motivation is he knows that Saul wants David dead. So the enemy of my enemy is my friend. It's probably, he's a little wary of him, but he lets them come and stay. And he tells them they can go down and stay at Ziklag. Ziklag, as you saw on that map, is down to the south. And so what he's doing is he's using David and his men to sort of protect his southern border. He's far enough away that he can't cause too much trouble for him, but at the same time, he's there to protect against the Amalekites and people who tend to come in and raid Ziklag's land. So it's not a bad arrangement for anybody. Verse 6 says, that day Achish gave him Ziklag, and to this day it still belongs to the kings of Judah. And the time that David lived in the Philistine territory amounted to 1 year and 4 months. There are several ways to interpret that. We don't need to worry about it.
Well, I think the important part about this year and 4 months, remember, David started fleeing from Saul, and they believe it's 10 to 13 years that he's on the run. And this is the last 1 year and 4 months. So for 9 years, 10 years, whatever, David has been, he is worn down. And this is the last, so this is 1 year and 4 months before David is going to become king. So that's why it's important.
So, and maybe we'll pull the map up again in a minute, but it says that David and his men went up and raided the Geshurites, the Gerzites, and the Amalekites. From ancient times, these people had inhabited the land extending to Shur and Egypt. So bottom line, he's going down and raiding these other Palestinian sort of tribes down to the south. And whenever David attacked a territory, here's one of the things that we're just not going to like. Certainly, it's an uncomfortable thing. Whenever David attacked a territory, he did not leave a man or woman alive, but took the flocks and herds, the donkeys, the camels, and the clothing.
Keep going.
Then he would return to Achish, who would ask him, "Who have you raided today?" And David would reply, "The Negev of Judah, or the Negev of Jerahmeel, the Negev of the Kenites." David did not leave a man or woman alive to be brought to Gath, for he said, "Otherwise they will report us, saying, 'This is what David did.'" And this was David's custom the whole time he lived in Philistine territory. Can you bring that map up again? I can finish the last verse while you're doing it. Achish trusted David, thinking, since he's made himself an utter stench to the people of Israel, he will be my servant forever. So Ziklag, if you can see this cursor, Gath is up here. This is where Achish is. He gives David Ziklag, one of these areas. He's going down to these other Philistine tribes and raiding them. But he's telling Achish that he's going over here and raiding Judah and Judah's allies. So the king of the Philistines thinks this guy is going out and doing raids on his own people, my enemies, and they're going to hate him for it. So now he can't go home. He's mine. I've got him forever. That's what everybody is thinking. And David is doing this deception, actually raiding the enemies of Israel.
Can you read the first two verses of 28? Remember, the big thing about the Bible, the verses and the chapters were put afterwards. So sometimes they're in weird locations, and the fact that the first two verses of 28 really go with this story.
First two verses of 28. Now in those days, the Philistines gathered their forces for warfare against Israel. So Achish said to David, "You must understand that you and your men are to go out to battle with me." David replied, "Then you will come to know what your servant can do." "Very well," said Achish, "I will make you my bodyguard for life." So David has been living here in Philistine territory. The king believes that he's been raiding his own people. And now it's time, you hit spring when it's a good time to ride out to war. And now it's time to go on serious raids against Israel. And he says, you got to understand, living here, you're going to ride out with me and you're going to fight against your own people. You're going to add your forces to mine. And David's response is sort of nebulous. He says, and then you'll understand what I can do. Now you're going to see what I can really do.
And I'll tell you, we listened to sermons this week, and this one line can be looked at in completely different ways. So it says, then you will come to know what your servant can do. So has David gone over to the dark side? Is he really on Achish's side? And is he really going to go against his people? Is he going to go against the Jews? Is he going to go against Saul, who he has had opportunity after opportunity to kill, and he didn't do it because he is the anointed one from God? Has he gone over to the dark side? Is he killing Saul? Some people think he is. Other ministers say, oh no, listen to that. He doesn't exactly say. What he's saying is, you'll come to know what your servant can do, because I'm going to attack you. I'm going to, I'll be in the back, and then I will kill the Philistines. So we don't know.
We don't know. David's in a bind. David's got a mess on his hands.
And we don't know what he's thinking.
We don't know what he's thinking for sure. I think personally, there's sort of a clue in that he's been raiding these other people who are enemies of Israel and not really raiding the tribes in Judah. But it's not explicit. What is explicit is that David's in a bind. He's allied himself with this Philistine king because Saul's been trying to kill him for so long. He's gone and done this, and now he's being called on. We always see it in the movies. You've got to do something to prove you're really loyal, that you're really part of the dark side. And so David makes this statement, and we just don't know. But what we do know that comes up. So
what's great right here is then we put this part of the story on pause.
That's true.
And it doesn't come back for another chapter. So it's like when you read the Bible and you read it like this, you realize not only is it, the background of our faith, but it's also a great story. So they put this on hold, and now we're going to a crazy story.
Two things are happening at the same time. And yeah, this next one, if you think going into these villages and killing every man, woman, and child, if you think that's hard to deal with, wait for the next one.
Well, one thing before we leave this, one of the ministers that we listened to, which is a Calvary Chapel minister, by the way, we were having a conversation about Calvary Chapel this weekend. And we call him Pastor Paul. He says, we really don't know what was on David's mind here. We don't know if he had gone to the dark side or not. And he says, when I get to heaven, he says, I think there's going to be a lineup of people that are going to want to ask David, so what were you thinking? I mean, why did you do this? Anyhow, thought that was funny.
Well, and speaking from personal experience, I think sometimes we just get ourselves in a bind and don't really have a plan, and you just kind of have to hope it comes out. By this time, Samuel had died, and all Israel had mourned for him and buried him in Ramah, his own city. And Saul had removed the mediums and spiritists from the land. They were instructed not to go see these mediums and spiritists, and Saul had removed them from Israel completely. The Philistines came together and camped at Shunem, while Saul gathered all Israel and camped at Gilboa. When Saul saw the Philistine army, he was afraid and trembled violently. He inquired of the Lord, but the Lord did not answer him by dreams or Urim or prophets. So,
do you want me to share the screen?
Hopefully this share, we can show you some stuff. I hope this, no, not the settings.
I always do that.
Share screen.
And I'm going to do this one. And share. This is another map. And this shows you, remember, Saul is in, how do you say that?
Gibeah.
And he has brought his people up to here.
Jezreel. Yeah.
Jezreel. And remember, the other thing to remember is the Philistines were a consortium of 5 cities. Of 5 city-states. And King Achish is only the king of Gath. And the other 5 cities are Gaza, however you say it.
Ashkelon, Ashdod, and Aphek.
So those are the 5 city-states of the Philistines. That's important. Do you want to keep reading?
Yeah, I don't want to make this boring. Some people don't like history and geography, but I do want you to understand that Saul goes up, that green line you see on the map. Saul goes up there. It's a better place to defend, and it's a good place for him to gather all of his people. The Philistines are gathering. This is going to be a major confrontation, and the Philistines are powerful. They've got chariots, and chariots are like tanks, in modern times. I mean, they've got a whole bunch of them, and they got a lot of people. They go up. Saul goes up to Jezreel, and there's a spring there that's big enough to handle all of these people, all of these soldiers. We went there. Mary actually swam in it when we were in Israel. Mary and the kids. They call it a warm spring. It's warmer, I guess. I don't know. It's warmer than ice water, but it's actually pretty cool water. And Mary, you want to read? This is Mary. I do. While we were there, Mary wrote a book. She started out sending home letters, and then she put them together, bound them together. But this is some information about our trip to this area.
And what's so funny, reading it over, so we went back in 2005 and 6. And so when I'm reading it now, I realize now that we're studying these stories, it means so much more to me, these trips that we went on. But this, it's January 8th in 2006. And we decided to go. Next stop was Gan Hashlosh, which is one of Israel's 63 national parks. It's a park set around natural pools that are fed by hot springs. One can swim in the pools year round because the temperature of the water is 82 degrees Fahrenheit. When I was reading about it, it sounded great. Swim in warm water in the winter. It wasn't until I got there and Scott gave me one of those looks, what were you thinking, that I realized that 82 degrees Fahrenheit is not all that hot. Amanda, Peter, and I took the plunge, see attached. The water was crystal clear. We felt little bites on our feet and realized that we were surrounded by a school of fish. We were told that in the summer, the place is overrun with people. Even though the water was a little too refreshing, I don't think we would have enjoyed it nearly as much. The Arabs believed that this was the site of the Garden of Eden. Julie said she did not think so because there was no apple trees.
So the things that I want you to keep in mind, the things I want you to get is that in order to field an army as big as what Saul is, having enough water for them. And one of the things about this place is there's this big spring and pool that has enough water for an army. If you remember the story of Gideon, that Gideon was supposed to go out and fight, and God kept saying, cut the number of people in half, cut them in half again, get rid of them. And eventually they're at this pool, this stream, and the men that kneel down and lap water up like dogs are the ones he's supposed to keep. And there were only 300. It's Jezreel. This is the same place where Gideon was to ready his army that wound up only being 300 men. So there's a lot of history here. Where do you want me to start?
We're at the medium.
We talked about the medium, and we got to talk about this for just a minute too. These spiritus mediums, the Israelites were not supposed to deal with them. Saul has kicked them out, but Saul sees these Philistines arrayed. You can see great distances, but he sees how many of them there are. He sees the chariots, and Saul's afraid. And that's always the case with Saul. He is opposites. He's a contradiction. Sometimes he's brave, but he sees this and he's afraid. And normally he would get advice from the priest. But you remember, he's had him killed. They went into Nob and brought out all the priests, and Saul had them all killed. So he's got nobody to go to for advice. And so he says to one of his servants, find me a woman who's a medium so I can go and consult her. And that word that they use as medium, literally in the Hebrew, is ghost wife. That's how they think of them. Go and find me one of these spiritualists. And remember, he's kicked them all out of the country.
He's not supposed to be doing this. There aren't supposed to be any. And this is what I think is so amazing. There's a medium at Endor, his servants replied. So they all knew where she was. He didn't have any problem locating one. She's been on the down low, but she's still there. And so Saul disguised himself. Obviously, he's the king that has kicked them all out. Now he's going to go to one. He's got to disguise himself, put on different clothes, and he set out with 2 of his men. They came to the woman at night, and Saul said, consult a spirit for me. Bring up for me the one I name. And here's one of those times that I worry, at least some of you are going to look at me differently, but you know, I may make you not like me, but here's the deal. I say often, there is more to this place than meets the eye. We take we believe in, and I believe in science more than most, but there's more here than just what we see with our eyes. So I'm going to tell you a story. When I was about probably 8, this thing with Ouija boards got to be it was a fad. And my mother and sister went and got one, and they said, we're going to do this. And Ouija board, and this is not necessarily what you think, but you know how everyone says that it's your subconscious and you just kind of lead it where you want to go. And my sister, being who she is, asked this thing to tell us a joke. And it begins to spell out, and you think, okay, this is us. This is a joke we all know. And the joke was, I would use the word macabre. Is everybody familiar with that? Dark and sort of ugly. And it was one of those things that it'd be like saying, why did the chicken cross the road? And you say, because it was on the bumper of the truck. It's not really a joke, but you recognize that there is a joke there. But the problem is this joke had a word in it that my mother and sister did not even know what it meant. And I knew they didn't know what it meant. I was an odd child, okay? And I said this week.
His sister's 8 years older than him, but and Scott's got it, and I'll say it, he's got a off the charts IQ. So he knew he read stuff.
The point is, I read a lot of things, and it's one of those things that I knew they wouldn't have encountered, and I knew I didn't make this joke up, and it spooked me. Okay, and I'm telling you, it's not the sort of thing that you just make up off the cuff. And they didn't know. They're sitting there with this blank stare on their face because they don't know what this word means. And it sort of said, I'll tell you what it is. The word is jackal. Do you know what a jackal is? Yeah. Some of you are shaking your head. They didn't know. It's sort of like a wild dog. It's a dog relative, and it eats corpses and stuff if it gets a chance. They're well known in that part of the world. They do not live in our part of the world. So unless you read a lot, I knew what it was, and I knew they weren't kidding. They didn't know what it was, and they've got blank stares. And I'm sitting here going, if I tell them I know what that is, if I explain this, they're going to assume that I made this up, that it's on me. So what I'm telling you is, I do not fully rule out what we're being told here, that there's a medium. And I'm not going to get into any more than that, other than it was a thing that I felt like was directed at me even at the time. I was the only one who got it. So make of that what you will. But Saul disguised himself and goes to see this woman, this ghost wife. And when he gets there, the woman said, he asked to bring someone. The woman replies, surely you know what Saul has done, how he has killed the mediums and spiritists in the land. Why have you set a trap to get me killed? So see, she's playing it like, I'll get in trouble if I do this. She doesn't know it's Saul then. And she's kind of testing the waters, I think. Then Saul swore to her by the Lord. Not a good practice at best. As surely as the Lord lives, no punishment shall come upon you for this. So she tests the waters, And he says, swears, but she doesn't know who he is, but he swears by the Lord. So he's assured her, I'm not going to turn you into Saul. Whom shall I bring up for you? The woman asked. Bring up Samuel, he replied. Now, the irony of that can't be lost on you, because when Samuel was alive, Saul wouldn't listen to him. That's how he got himself into trouble. But he knows, he's scared, he wants advice, and he's asking to speak to Samuel. When the woman saw Samuel, she cried out in a loud voice and said to Saul, why have you deceived me? You are Saul. And it seems that she was actually surprised. So maybe this is not a regular occurrence for her. But at this point, that something happens, she sees, and she's, and the other thing that you have to understand is that kings of Israel have a prophet, usually one, that's almost like they're assigned to them. The king and the prophet go hand in hand for most of their years. And so Samuel being there with, associated with Saul, she figures it out. And Saul says, do not be afraid. What do you see? And she says, I see a God coming up out of, and this God is also used as something like a spirit. It's an easy translation because it also gets translated as God. But she sees the spirit coming up, and he is wearing a robe. And it seems logical in this context that it's a robe that the priest typically wore. A prophet probably typically wore. So Saul knew that it was Samuel, and he bowed face down in reverence. Then Samuel said to Saul, why have you disturbed me by bringing me up? I'm deeply distressed, replied Saul. The Philistines are fighting against me, and God has turned away from me. He no longer answers me, either by prophets or dreams. So I've called on you to tell me what to do. Now, again, Saul perceives God has turned from him. As is typical with Saul, he doesn't take note of the fact that he turned away from God. That says, again, something about Saul, but God's not answering him. You've killed all the priests, Saul. You don't have much way to get answered, but Saul's whining. And Samuel's response, why do you consult me, asked Samuel, since the Lord has turned away from you and become your enemy? He has done exactly what he spoke through me. The Lord has torn the kingship out of your hand and given it to your neighbor David. This is the first time that David has been explicitly mentioned as the one who's going to get the kingdom when Saul is gone. Because you did not obey the Lord or carry out his burning anger against Amalek, the Lord has done this to you today. Moreover, the Lord will deliver Israel with you into the hand of the Philistines, and tomorrow you and your sons will be with me. Tomorrow you die with your descendants. And the Lord will deliver the army of Israel into the hand of the Philistines. This is the day Saul has been running from for all these years, trying to kill David. He, down deep, I've always said he knows it's David. And he thinks if I can get rid of the other guy who's supposed to replace me, I can escape this fate. And this is the day of reckoning. This is the day he's been told about. Immediately, Saul fell flat on the ground, terrified by the words of Samuel, and his strength was gone because he had not eaten anything all that day and night. When the woman came to Saul and saw how distraught he was, she said to him, look, your maidservant has obeyed your voice. I took my life in my hands and did as you told me. Now, please listen to your servant. Let me set a morsel of bread before you so you may eat and have the strength to go your way. So put yourself in her place. She's not supposed to be doing this. Saul comes, this thing happens, and she learns Saul's about to be killed. You really don't want him in the house right now. I mean, I don't blame her. I would like to get you out of here. Saul refused to eat, saying, I will not eat, which is a good thing to say when you're refusing to eat. But his servants joined the woman in urging him, and he heeded their voice, and he got up from the ground and sat on the bed. The woman had a fatted calf at her house. She quickly slaughtered it. She also took flour and kneaded it and baked unleavened bread. She served it to Saul and his servants, and they ate, and that night they got up and left. You got things you want to say about this?
No. We get to go back to David now.
So yeah, the bottom line, Saul knows he's still got to, he's got to go fight. He's got to go make a show of it. That's got to be a kind of a bad place to be. And Mary's right. Now we're back to David. These two things are going on simultaneously. The Philistines brought their forces together at Aphek, while Israel camped in the spring at Jezreel. As the Philistine leaders marched out their units of hundreds and thousands, David and his men marched behind them with Achish. And we're back to this dilemma that David has of being now aligned with this. I mean, if he tries to desert, he's in trouble with Achish. And if he rides with him, he's got to fight against Israel.
It does say he's in the back, which people said it was not unusual.
No, it's not unusual. One of the classic things about armies is that generals don't tend to ride up front. They let everybody else go up front and take the brunt of it. So Achish is in the back. David is with him. And remember, he said to David, "You'll be my bodyguard." Now, he knows by the way, he knows David's reputation. And this success that David has is played out many, many times. You remember Joseph going down to Egypt and serving the Pharaoh, Daniel, he's very successful. Achish, the Philistine king, is honoring him. And it says the commanders, and that's the commanders of the other four kings, the commanders of the Philistines asked, "What about these Hebrews?" And Achish replied, "Is this not David, the servant of King Saul of Israel? He's been with me all these days, even years. And from the day he defected," you get that, he believes that David has defected. "From the day he defected until today, I have found no fault in him." Achish is taking a big step, vouching for David. But the commanders of the Philistines were angry with Achish and told him, "Send that man back and let him return to the place you assigned him. He must not go down with us into battle, only to become our adversary during the war. What better way for him to regain the favor of his master than with the heads of our men? Is this not the David about whom they sing in their dances? Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands."
And that song was from 10 years ago. I mean, just think about that. It's like the best hits 10 years later.
David's got the reputation of killing Philistines. And this is, if you think that David didn't really plan to fight and kill his own people, then you have to think that he probably would have turned on them in the middle of a battle. And so these guys are really pretty smart. They're making a pretty wise decision sending him back. We can't, and a force like that in the rear can do tremendous damage in the middle of a battle. So they're wise sending him away.
See,
Yes.
I think the commanders were right militarily, but I think they understand that David is their enemy because he is a God-fearing man, and they are not. They have their own.
Remember, there's no
one
speaker
Lord,
out there.
One God, and that divide is not to this day. We're not going. You can't put your guys will stab you in the back. Militarily and religiously.
And religiously. Well, and that's going to play out in the next verse. So I
And we
think
apologize today. We didn't have time to set up. We
The room
usually
mics-
have room mics.
the room
so-
mics will be back and hopefully better than before. So here's the next part. And it plays into what Gene said about listen to what Achish summoned David and told him, "As surely as the Lord lives, you have been upright in my sight." That word, and it's important to note, that word is Yahweh. not a God, not his God. He is saying, as surely as Yahweh lives. Achish is a Philistine. He does not worship Yahweh. This is a tremendous honor to David and his faith in Yahweh. He knows who David worships. You're absolutely right. And he says to David, because he is really paying him a compliment, he says, as surely as Yahweh lives. That's an acknowledgement that Yahweh lives. As surely as Yahweh lives, you have been upright in my sight. And it seems right that you should march in and out with me in the army, because I have found no fault in you from the day you came to me until this day. But you have no favor in the sight of the leaders. Therefore, turn back now and go in peace, so that you will not do anything to displease the leaders of the Philistines. And he's actually protecting David. You're not going to get into this battle and either turn on us or do something that they can use as an excuse to turn on you.
But David's response is weird to me.
It is. David's response is weird. You want to read it? I don't like it.
But what have I done? David replied. What have you found against your servant from the day I have came to you until today to keep me from going along to fight against the enemies of my Lord the king? So, I mean, he's getting an out, and instead he says, hey, wait a minute, I really want to go with you. So that seems weird.
We don't know. He could have been absolutely planning to turn on him from the back in the heat of battle, and this is a missed opportunity. I don't know what David's thinking. None of us know. Achish replied, I know that you are as pleased. Oh, bless you. I know that you are as pleasing in my sight as an angel of God. And you'll notice that's a different word. And it is, but an angel of Elohim. But the commanders of the Philistines have said, he must not go into battle with us. So he's like apologizing to David. You've been great to me, but they don't like you. Now then, get up early in the morning along with your master's servants who came with you, and go as soon as it is light. David and his men got up early in the morning to return to the land of the Philistines, and the Philistines went up to Jezreel. So David is delivered from his dilemma. David has put himself in a bind. And if you remember a couple of weeks ago, there was a point where they're on a mountain, and Saul is on the other side, but Saul's catching up. And David's about to get ridden down, and this is going to be the end. And a messenger comes and tells Saul, we're under attack. You got to break off this chase of David and come defend the country. And David was delivered. Here's another time David is delivered, because the other commanders say, you can't let this guy go to battle with us. I don't know what would have happened. We just don't know. But David was delivered.
So David's getting sent back to Ziklag.
David's going home along with all of his men. And remember, they've moved in with their wives and children and cattle.
So there's probably thousands, or at least a couple of thousands.
With all the other people, it's a pretty good sized entourage. They haven't ridden out to battle. They're back home in Ziklag. They've been raiding the other Amalekites and Geshurites. So they've got some livestock. This is a booming little town. On the third day, David and his men arrived in Ziklag, and the Amalekites had raided the Negev, attacked Ziklag, and burned it down. So they get home, and this is another thing that is really common with these raiding tribes in that part of the country. You ride off to war, and while you're busy somewhere else, they come in and raid your stuff. It just happens. It happens all the time. They had taken captive the women and all who were there, both young and old. They had not killed anyone, but had carried them off as they went on their way. When David and his men came to the city, they found it burned down and their wives and sons and daughters taken captive. So David and the troops with them lifted up their voices and wept until they had no strength left to weep. David's two wives, Ahinoam of Jezreel and Abigail, the widow of Nabal of Carmel, had been taken captive. And David was greatly distressed because the people spoke of stoning him, because the soul of every man grieved for his sons and daughters. But David found strength in the Lord his God. So this gets talked about a whole lot, and there's more in here than it might seem. But the big thing is they get home, their city is burned, and all the people and livestock, they've been looted and everything's been taken. And the men are grieving, and they decide to stone David because it's his fault. And there's no law that prevents them from doing that. They're a band of people living among the Philistines. If they want to elect a new leader to the band by stoning David, they can do it. And it's a reaction. It's people do these things. They want to turn on someone. They want to blame someone. They're going to stone him. And then there's this statement. It says, David found strength in the Lord his God. And believe it or not, an awful lot gets made of that. There are loads and loads of commentaries on this and what it means. And I went and did a dive, that exact same phrase of strengthening yourself is used. One of the future kings, Rehoboam, strengthened himself in Jerusalem, but he got in trouble because he didn't seek the Lord. So he strengthened the area around Jerusalem. He built up the walls. He built up the army. He reinforced his position, but he didn't seek the Lord. And the idea of this strengthening yourself in the Lord, in the actual Hebrew, there's this phrase that means to strengthen yourself. And the next word is Yahweh. They don't use a lot of conjunctions. There's no in, there's no with, there's no by, there's no through. He strengthened himself, Yahweh. And we're left to people speculate. All I know is people were about to stone him. David strengthened himself with them, and God was involved. Did he pray about it on the spot? Did he draw on his knowledge that God had anointed him? And did he assert himself with confidence? You've got to decide, but it says that he strengthened himself somehow through God.
And then, the next part is when he does ask the priest to come.
Well, and then we see what he does about that. That's right. David said to Abiathar the priest, the son of Ahimelech, bring me the ephod.
So remember, Abiathar was the only person left in Nob when Saul went crazy and killed all the priests in Nob and all the people of Nob. The only person that was left was Abiathar, and he went to go tell David. So he is a priest, and now David's priest.
And so, so these kings had priests, prophets, who were their advisors. And they had this ephod, this ornate sort of vest that was a symbol of their office. And they used that Urim and Thummim to divine God's will. And this is another one of those things that I'm just not terribly comfortable with, but it says that's what they did.
There were stones, I thought, right?
Some people believe they're stones. Some people believe there was one black and one white, and they stuck them in a bag like a magic 8-ball. I don't know what to say. These were the priests, and they were consulting God. And it's not, I don't see how it's my place one way or the other to judge it. This is what they did. And he says, bring me the ephod. So Abiathar brought it to him. And David inquired of the Lord, should I pursue these raiders? Will I overtake them? And so the answer comes back, pursue them, the Lord replied, for you will surely overtake them and rescue the captives. So what's happened is they're proposing stoning David. And David says, no, I've got a better idea. How about if we ride down these people and take our stuff back and get all of our people back? And he consults God. He brings the priest and he consults God. And this is a thing that is so often missing in what, like Saul, that's what's missing in his life, is Saul goes his way. He was supposed to consult God. And the answer he gets back is go after them. Now, here's what you got to understand about that. These Amalekites were also numerous. David has 600 men
That are tired.
And they've got to go ride people down. They're going to be even more tired. They're going to be outnumbered. And so it's no small thing what they're proposing. And he asks for advice. He says, are we going to ride out against this superior force? Are we going to go run them down? And he gets the answer, yes. So David and his 600 men went to the brook of Besor, where some stayed behind. Some of his men stayed behind because it says 200 men were too exhausted to cross the brook. But David and 400 men continued in pursuit, strangely similar to Gideon. Now his men found an Egyptian in the field and brought him to David. They gave the man water to drink and food to eat. And once again, remember, I told you they were, when David came looking for food, the Jews were supposed to help people. They were supposed to do this, and they find an Egyptian, and they give him food and water, a piece of fig cake and 2 clusters of raisins, and he ate and was revived. For he had not had any food or water for 3 days and nights. Then David asked him, to whom do you belong, and where are you from? I'm an Egyptian, he replied, the slave of an Amalekite. My master abandoned me 3 days ago when I fell ill. We raided the Negev of the Kerethites. And by the way, Negev, you hear Negev desert and all that stuff. Negev just means southern region. That's all it really means, is a southern place. We raided the Negev of the Kerethites, the territory of Judah, and the Negev of Caleb, and we burned down Ziklag. So this guy is a servant of an Amalekite that's responsible for burning down the town. And David says, will you lead me to these raiders? And the man replied, swear to me by God that you will not kill me or deliver me into the hand of my master, and I will lead you to them. Sort of a handy meeting, coincidence, right? So he led David down, and there were the Amalekites spread out over the land, eating, drinking, and celebrating the great amount of plunder they had taken from the land of the Philistines and the land of Judah. So keep in mind, while the Philistines have ridden out, these people have come in and looted their country. They've also looted areas in Judah.
When Saul was up fighting.
When Saul was up, they came in and they were celebrating all the loot they've gotten. And David struck them down from twilight until the evening of the next day. Not a man escaped except 400 young men who fled riding off on camels. All right, there's something here that mostly gets overlooked. A remnant of these Amalekites escaped. They killed off a huge number, and these 400 who escaped on camels were a remnant. David only has 400 men with him. The little remnant that escaped is equal in size to David's army. And he rides in, he thrashes them, and it says, David recovered everything the Amalekites had taken. How are we on time?
Close. 5 minutes.
He recovered everything the Amalekites had taken, including his 2 wives. Nothing was missing, young or old, son or daughter, or any of the plunder the Amalekites had taken. David brought everything back, and he recovered all the flocks and herds, which his men drove ahead of the other livestock, calling out, "This is David's plunder." We aren't going to have time to finish this because the last part it deserves to be done justice. There's a lot in it. But some things you've got to understand, the Amalekites had looted this big area, huge army, taken a lot of plunder. It was all now David's, right? Remember, 2 things are going on simultaneously. we know Saul is going to die tomorrow or, soon. And David has taken all of this plunder and is now greatly enriched. And so are his men, by the way. So much that the men are driving all of these herds ahead, saying this is David's plunder. Suddenly, David is looking more kingly. And I don't know, is there time to go through? Do you want to try?
No, I would say, what do we learn here from David being a man after God's own heart?
Well, when things were really on the line, he turned back to God.
This whole section has been the contrast between him and Saul never turned back to God.
Saul does not, and that's exactly right. It is the contrast. Saul is the king. Saul doesn't consult God. David is the incoming king, but he's the outlaw. And even though we see him doing some things, we see him, going into some situations, David consults Yahweh. He makes a point of it. And when things are really on the line, he does so.
But he's not always a good guy, and that's okay too, because he always turns back to God and God.
Well, the amazing thing is that it appears that we can be forgiven. That if there's a lesson there for us, that we can be forgiven, because certainly some of these things are not good things. There are a lot of commentaries that make a big deal out of those raids, and they want to decide whether or not David was bad. David had, gone to the dark side. I don't understand fully everything, but if any of you are considering killing off every man, woman, and child in a village, don't do that. Okay. Don't do it. It's not good. There's a lesson we can learn. It's out the window. Yes, sir.
Is there any insight into the David strengthening Yahweh? You with me? And now going to a priest for consultation, and now the story is prolonged and clarified. Why get a better hold?
Hope you can hear this.
Talking to Yahweh and consulting Yahweh, why do you take the extra step and go to a priest?
Well, that's the way it's done. Now, what Gene is asking is, if you're going to go to Yahweh, why go to the extra step and go to a priest? That's what they were instructed to do. Israel. I mean, this was a process that was ordained. The king should get his counsel from the prophets. I mean, the judges came, the prophets came, and they were always there to advise. And the kings were supposed to get this advice from the priest. And this was set up that way. And we can talk more about this because it'll tie in next week. But David is doing exactly what he's supposed to be doing, but he's doing what Saul is supposed to be doing. David is behaving like a king. Saul has killed all of his priests and has no one, and so he goes to a spiritist. The big point right here, we'll get to that next week, but the big point here is the contrast between David and Saul. David is kingly, Saul is not. So next week we'll have this recorded. I'll try and get it posted out there. Take it with us today. Stop.